From having a lot of ways to tackle their opponents in a deeply competitive match, to keeping the sport way more interesting and dynamic at all times, here's why MMA is better than boxing. And it all starts with the most basic things, like the fact that MMA involves much more techniques and styles. Let me just say, MMA has been considered the better sport by many people. Just take the actual hitting part of the sport. Boxing is mostly about punches, and boxers usually wear gloves with extra padding to protect their hands. MMA fighters, on the other hand, often use many different moves such as kicks, knees, and elbows. Not to mention, most of them don't wear as much padding on their hands either. And the fights are usually rougher. Some people like how technical boxing is, but others like how raw and exciting MMA is. But there's one thing that is certain. Both sports can be very addicting. Stepping into the ring or cage gives many people a rush of adrenaline like nothing else. Though another visual that's super well known when it comes to these fights is the ground game. Anyone who's ever been in a boxing ring knows that it's not an easy sport. For the stand-up game, you need to know how to move your feet, move your head, and throw punches from different angles. But while boxing may look like two fighters flailing at each other, the ground game in MMA makes it even more complicated. MMA fighters need to be good at striking, but they also need to know how to take down, grapple, and submit their opponents. They not only have to be in great shape, but they also have to be very skilled technically. Because of this, the ground game in MMA is a lot more complicated and fun than in boxing. And also, because of this, the sport is much harder on the body and mind than boxing. Though this also adds another dimension to the competition. Because in an MMA fight, there are many more ways to win than in a boxing match. You've probably noticed how, a lot of times, MMA fights are over before they even begin. And this depends on strategizing. A good MMA fighter can figure out how to use their opponent's weaknesses and get them out of the comfort zone by looking at their previous fights. Yeah, they actually do their studying in this sport, guys. In boxing, where fighters tend to have more focused styles and techniques, this is hard to do. MMA fighters can also use techniques from different disciplines, which make it harder for their opponents to guess what they'll do next. Plus, they don't have to follow the same rules as boxers, so they have more ways to take down an opponent. And that's why there are a lot more ways to win. That said, MMA gives you and your opponent more chances to make mistakes, too. And taking all of that into consideration, you have to be more skilled to see when your opponent makes a mistake and take advantage of it. And this leads me to another point. After all, learning a lot of cool ways to beat someone can definitely increase your chances of winning. And this also means that MMA leaves more room for creativity than boxing. I mean, MMA fighters have to be skilled in more than one area, while boxers only have to worry about one. A mixed martial arts fighter might have training in boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, or other styles. This means that they have a wider range of techniques and can use them in any way they think best. A boxer, though, has a lot less to choose from. Different sets of rules are also a factor. In boxing, there are strict rules about how and where punches can be thrown. There are also rules about getting close to someone and wrestling with them. These rules are much less strict in MMA. So fighters get creative with their punches and holds and come up with new ways to beat their opponents, which, honestly, is probably a good thing. Still, in MMA, it's also common to see strange submission attempts or unique strikes that don't happen in boxing. For example, only MMA has moves like the gogoplata and the twister, which are rare and hard to do. This lets MMA fighters show off their creativity in the cage, which boxers can't do. In boxing, techniques like hurricane kicks, spinning back fists, and other moves that have become popular in MMA would never be allowed. And this is because these moves, well, they aren't exactly boxing moves, are they? Apart from the actual in-game intricacies of one-on-one fights, however, There are some other factors that make MMA seem kinda cooler, like the fact that the UFC has done a better job of promoting mixed martial arts to the general public than boxing has. Don't get me wrong, boxing has definitely been better in the past, but once the undisputed king of combat sports, boxing has lost its crown to mixed martial arts in recent years. Even though some of the biggest names in sports are still in boxing, the UFC has done a better job of promoting MMA to the general public. One big difference is that UFC events have more than one fight on the card, which keeps fans interested even if the main event doesn't do much for them. The UFC has also done a better job of making its fighters known as people, instead of just relying on their ability to fight to sell tickets. The UFC has worked to build stories and rivalries between its athletes, kinda like wrestling, which is why MMA events tend to be more fun and get more attention than boxing matches. In the end, the UFC has done a better job than boxing over the past few years of getting mainstream people interested in combat sports. And because of these extra fights and the need to sell tickets, at the end of the day, there can be a lot more martial artists than boxers. The thing is, you can only punch someone so many ways. The same few moves are used over and over again in boxing. I mean, the sport can get boring and repetitive for some people. On the other hand, mixed martial arts is a sport that has a lot more to offer. It includes takedowns, grappling, and submissions, as well as strikes done while standing. This means that more martial artists can take part in the sport and mix things up with their own styles. People who do wrestling, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and more can all compete in the same sport, which keeps things interesting. Also, in MMA, it's easier to start out while being part of those filler fights between the main events. The boxing world doesn't give that many opportunities for newcomers, though. In the end, the thing that scares a lot of people when it comes to these sports are the injuries. And even in that category, boxing has more long-term head injuries than mixed martial arts. Boxers are always hitting each other in the head with hard punches. This can cause both short-term and long-term head injuries that are very bad. Studies have shown that boxers are more likely than any other group of athletes to get long-term injuries. Now, of course, MMA fighters are also always hitting each other, but head strikes aren't as important. Plus, they're also trained in grappling and submission holds, which can help keep head injuries to a minimum. Because of this, MMA is less likely to cause long-term head injuries than boxing. Seriously, a grappler can go his whole career without getting as many blows to the head as a boxer does in one fight. I mean, it may not seem that important to an average viewer, but it's massive for the competitors themselves. And that, folks, is why MMA is better than boxing.